Hello, readers by eyes and by ears. This is Mighty Chan, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we are continuing with the reading of the Disabled Tyrant's Beloved Pet Fish, Vol.4, also known as 残疾暴君的掌心鱼宠 by Xue Shan Fei Hu. And I hope you guys are excited. If you're not, get excited with me because we are officially a little bit over halfway done with this novel. Not really sure why I did that. Anyway, I'm ready to continue. This video is going to be a little bit longer because I'm reading over the weekend, which means I have more reading time and upload time, essentially. So I hope you all enjoy. Chapter 137, Green-Eyed Fishy. Liu had just woken up. His temples were pounding, and his head was spinning. When he took a good look, he saw that Wangxi was still playing with the children, not speaking at all. It was probably just a dream. But the dream was horribly real. With Prince Ding's current position, it was inevitable that he'd be desired by the other nobility sooner or later. In some ways, the Emperor letting Prince Ding help with the paperwork was already an acknowledgement of his current status. Apparently, back when the second prince, the Marquis of An, was about to become crown prince, even he hadn't received such treatment from the Emperor, never mind the hot-headed third prince, the Marquis of Ping. But Prince Jing was different. He was the only living D-son of the late Empress. His lone criticized trait, his muteness, had been cured. And he'd even saved the Emperor. What reason could the Emperor have not to choose Prince Ding? If there were court officials who'd hesitated to support Prince Ding before, they were now following the Emperor's wishes. Liu had once heard Wangxi mention how respected Prince Ding was nowadays, and even if you ignored everything else, the Emperor had ordered Prince Ding to attend court lately. Every day after court was dismissed, you'd need more hands than any person had to count the number of officials who waited to walk the same way as Prince Ding. These people hadn't kissed up to Prince Ding before because the situation had been complicated, but they'd be stupid not to kiss up now. But Prince Ding firmly remembered the Emperor's wariness and did not interact much with those people. The exception was Secretary Zheng, who Prince Ding would occasionally exchange a few words with. Zheng Jing had assisted him back when he worked at the Ministry of Works, so it made sense that they had a bit of a friendship. But when anyone else tried to suck up to him, Prince Ding met them with a cold expression. He wouldn't make it easy for them. When Wangxi mentioned how respected Prince Ding was to Liu, he kept things happy and light. He didn't dare speak of anything else. Prince Ding was busy helping govern a country, so the weight of taking care of Liu was handed to Wang Gonggong. Because this pregnancy was happening in Liu's human form, Prince Ding could explain everything to Wangxi without reservations. He asked him to be very careful. Wangxi couldn't be more elated that the consort was pregnant again, and he was determined not to say anything unnecessary in front of Liu. Naturally, there were ladies who wanted to marry Prince Ding, and there were many of them. But Prince Ding never paid attention to any of them, nor did he take them seriously, so how could Wangxi be the one to mention it? Unfortunately, Liu was sensitive during his pregnancy, so his subconscious imagined the danger anyway. And the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. In ancient times, all men had many wives. Liu trusted his husband, but ultimately Prince Ding had to answer to the Emperor. If those nobles turned to the Emperor when Prince Ding turned them down, and the Emperor really did decide to impulsively appoint a few of them to Prince Ding's household, how could they get out of that? Was he supposed to play the role of a fish spirit ripping into a lusty fox spirit? That wouldn't do. His husband had to be his and his only. Liu stood up abruptly. Usually, he spent a little longer laying around after he woke up, but right now he had absolutely no intention of sleeping. He wanted to find Prince Ding right away. At that moment, Prince Ding just so happened to return with a few imperial physicians. These physicians were all gynecological experts appointed by the Emperor, so Liu never really came in contact with them. At first, he didn't even recognize who they were. The dream he'd been having had jumbled up his brain, and he thought these people were trying to get Prince Ding to marry their daughters. Liu froze and said aggressively, "You've brought them back to our home?" He'd assumed Prince Ting would definitely say no, whether it was a matchmaking old man or a beautiful, elegant young lady. He'd thought he would ignore all of them. But look at this! Prince Ting had practically brought them right to his feet. It was true after all. All men were pigs. His wife was suddenly sad and indignant. Prince Ting had no idea what had happened. Prince Ting's own intellect might be online, but he had no idea where the fish's brain had wandered off to. In his experience, though, if he couldn't understand what Xiao Yu was saying, it would be best just to agree with everything he said. Oh, God. Besides, the physicians were here to take Xiao Yu's pulse, so Prince Ting nodded. Li Yu immediately puffed up like a pufferfish and jabbed a finger right up to his face. Then are you going to bring their daughters into the manor next? This was a huge accusation to hit all the physicians with at once. Consort, one of them responded, trembling. This old servant's daughter is only 3. Another said weakly, Consort, this old servant's daughter is already a mother to 3 children. Li Yu suddenly came to the realization that he'd gotten it wrong. Now he took a closer look. He saw that these officials were all carrying small medicine cases. Oh, these were imperial physicians. In this world, imperial physicians were considered a kind of official. They had ranks and wore the same clothes as court officials. Li Yu had just assumed they must be the family of possible future side consorts. He completely forgot the possibility that they might be physicians. He'd really embarrassed himself now. There was no way the #1 fish in the world could admit to such a mortifying thing. So Li Yu took a deep breath and immediately switched his demeanor. He smiled at the imperial physicians and extended his wrist. Imperial physicians, are you here to take my pulse? The confused imperial physicians finally let out a sigh of relief. That's right, consort. Watching as Xiao Yu's attitude change before his eyes, Prince Ting knew Xiao Yu had misunderstood something, but his health was more important. Prince Ting decided to put a pin in it for now. He held in his laughter and asked the physicians to quickly do their job. The physicians were focused on their task, so they didn't pay much mind to the nonsense Li Yu had said. Everyone knew pregnant people tended to have mood swings. To the imperial physicians, an occasional bout of anger was no big deal at all. Some pregnant women even cursed their husbands to high heavens right before a birth. When they took his pulse, the imperial physicians all said the consort was in good health and that the pregnancy was 3 months along. A few of them had heard of this male consort who was capable of giving birth and had been curious about him this whole time. Now that they'd seen for themselves, they could confirm Li Yu was indeed pregnant. The imperial physician who the emperor had sent to the western border had come this time as well. Last time, he'd taken Prince Ting's consort's pulse behind a veil. Quite some time had passed since then, and this time Li Yu was getting his pulse taken for real. But the physician didn't notice anything had changed. He kept congratulating Prince Ting. After that physician had examined Li Yu, Prince Ting thought, now the lie about Da Bao and the others has been fully covered up. Prince Ting asked the imperial physicians for anything they had to be careful about, then sent them away, telling them to bring the good news to the emperor. The outsiders left, and Prince Ting gave Li Yu an ambiguous smile. Li Yu knew he was in trouble. He looked at the 4 children pitifully, hoping his sons could distract Prince Ting, but unfortunately, 3 of the children were looking elsewhere. Only Sibao received his father's distress signal. Sibao, help me, Li Yu mouthed. Sibao took a moment to react, but he could tell his fish daddy needed help, so he bravely walked over, slowly on his short legs. Li Yu was delighted, as Prince Ting doted on Sibao the most. As long as Sibao whined a bit, everything would be fine. Li Yu tried to hide behind his son, but Prince Ting had his ways of dealing with this too. He glanced at Wang Xi. Wang Xi was about to arrange for the little master's snack time, so he picked up Sibao, smiling. Young master, let's go eat peach blossom pastries and candy, all right? Though Sibao didn't love food as much as Arbao did, he still couldn't resist the double temptation of peach blossom pastries and candy. He'd been playing for a while, after all, so he was hungry. Subao could only blink apologetically toward his fish father.
It's okay. Daddy Prince Ting will definitely help Fish Daddy.
And then Subao and his brothers left with Wang Xi. This unreliable child! Was it too late to pretend to be sleepy now? Li Yu yawned on purpose, pretending he wanted to return to their room for another nap. Perhaps when he woke up again, Prince Ting would forget what he had done. But Prince Ting had a good memory, and he stopped the fish in time. He pulled him back and wrapped his arms around him firmly. It would be difficult for the fish consort to escape now, even if he had wings. Prince Ting chuckled at the man in his arms. Xiao Yu, tell me, who wants to enter the manor? Li Yu's attempts to refuse to acknowledge the situation had all failed, so his only choice was to tell him what happened in the dream. Although it was just a dream, Li Yu was still very angry when he recalled it. Those women who want to be your side consorts, he said indignantly. Prince Ting cleared his throat. Dreams didn't come from nowhere. He'd already promised he wouldn't take any more wives, so he hadn't expected Xiao Yu to have such worries. Don't worry, there won't be anyone else, he said lightly. What side consort? Prince Ting wouldn't allow anyone else in their bed. He had his fish, and that was more than enough. Now that Prince Ting's stance had been made clear, Li Yu's eyes curved into pleasant crescent moons, but he still didn't forget to ask, what about Royal Father? He won't do anything either. Prince Ting hugged his jealous little fish and slowly explained something. To be honest, Li Yu's perception of the current situation was quite accurate. The Emperor had indeed asked Prince Ting about other wives at one point. After all, marriage was a good way to form alliances, but Prince Ting flatly refused. The Emperor had only brought it up casually. Now that he knew how Prince Ting felt, he had no intentions of forcing him. There were indeed officials who'd asked the Emperor, but contrary to Li Yu's assumptions, the Emperor didn't want to reward those officials with marriage. There were many reasons. One was that the Emperor had once put a lot of effort into arranging Prince Ting's marriage, but all the families he'd approved of had been reluctant to marry their daughters to Prince Ting and had come up with a variety of excuses to refuse. The Emperor could tell they just didn't want to do it. Now that the prince was no longer mute and was held in high regard, about to be the crown prince, those people had changed their tunes at the drop of a hat. Now they were desperate to send their daughters into Prince Ting's manor. The Emperor's thoughts aligned with Wang Xi's. They'd looked down on his son before, but now they suddenly wanted him? Too late. Besides, Prince Ting's consort was very good, and the Emperor didn't want to upset him for no reason. The Emperor had learned his lessons from Princess Langya. What if he appointed someone to Prince Ting who ended up bringing him trouble? Expanding the royal family was the usual excuse, but clearly that wasn't a problem for Prince Ting. Of course, if Prince Ting decided he wanted some concubines, the Emperor wouldn't stand in his way. But Prince Ting had clearly stated he didn't want any, so the Emperor wasn't going to force him. As for the officials who'd found a way to ask the Emperor responded to all of them flippantly. Unfortunately, even I can't convince Prince Ting. That's what Royal Father said. Prince Ting relayed the Emperor's stance quietly. Li Yu's face was red, either from embarrassment or shyness. He had misunderstood the Emperor. The Emperor was as human as anyone else. If you were good to him, he wouldn't make life hard for you. With a double guarantee, Li Yu felt completely reassured. Sorry, he said, looking down. I suddenly just couldn't help myself. He didn't know what was going on either. Recently, he kept feeling like there were bursts of anger traveling up to his brain, making his thoughts a little muddled as though he couldn't quite think clearly. Now that he'd calmed down, he felt like he'd been extremely unreasonable. It's not your fault. The imperial physician said you would be a little more sensitive during pregnancy. Prince Ting rubbed Li Yu's head, showing that he didn't mind. Besides, he added with a chuckle, it's because you care about me. Xiao Yu's personality was straightforward and blunt, and he rarely got mad at him. This was the first time he'd been unreasonable. Even if Xiao Yu was cursing him to his face, he would still like him. If the situation was reversed and Xiao Yu brought a bunch of men home, the result would have been disastrous. Li Yu had received Prince Sing's reassurance, and Prince Sing didn't have to do hard labor for the emperor anymore. With his husband's company, Li Yu's mood improved quickly. Meanwhile, the physicians who had examined Li Yu reported their diagnosis to the emperor. Prince Sing's consort was indeed pregnant. The emperor couldn't contain his smile. He flipped through the reports Prince Sing had looked through over the last few days. He had wanted to pick a good day to send out the edict, but now he felt like there was no need to wait anymore. There was no time like the present. Why not double the good news? So, the emperor ordered head eunuch Luo to summon the 6 ministers of Prince Li. He wanted to officially appoint Prince Sing as the crown prince in front of his top officials and royal family. Chapter 138, Fishy Writing Lesson. Prince Li and the 6 ministers had all mostly guessed the emperor's decision already. They just hadn't expected him to decide so quickly, because in the last dozen or so years, the emperor had never officially named a crown prince. Even if he had treated a certain prince differently, the emperor had stayed wary of him even as he educated him. He never made an announcement too early. Prince Li and the ministers all found Prince Sing extremely satisfactory. They had no objections to choosing him as the crown prince. But as the emperor's subjects, they couldn't just outright agree. A ruler's thoughts were difficult to guess, after all. After careful consideration, they all knelt. "Your Majesty is still young. Please give it due consideration." The emperor smiled, but didn't say anything. He had thought he was young before, too. But after everything that had happened recently, he'd come to the realization that he was no longer in his prime. When Princess Langya attacked, he couldn't even defend himself. It was humiliating, but there was nothing he could do. Even though the danger was temporary and had already passed, the enemy had been too insidious, disguising themselves as someone he never expected. After being under someone else's control, his age was starting to show. No matter how much he rested, his energy levels were no longer what they used to be. Even if he didn't want to admit it, people rarely lived past 70. Considering that, over half of his life was already over. He didn't know how many more years he had left. Discovering the truth behind the deaths of Empress Xiaohui and the 4th prince had been a huge blow to him. He'd been emperor for a long time, but when it came to some things, he was still powerless. His power and status couldn't bring back his dead wife, nor could it rewind time. It was time for him to let go of the power he'd been wielding for so long. He'd tested the waters first, letting Prince Sing handle government matters, and realized Prince Sing did well. Pleased with the results, he thought that since he'd already made his decision, why not just announce it and let go of his power? Either way, he no longer had the energy to care about politics. It was only natural for the crown prince to take over. If he started handling things now, his ascent to the throne could go smoothly. The emperor only gave it brief consideration, but he'd already imagined the coronation of the future emperor. He was a little shocked, but naming Prince Sing the crown prince meant it was just a matter of time. The emperor quickly let go of his reservations. Despite Prince Li and the minister's repeated urging, the emperor never changed his mind. In the end, they all expressed that they would support all the emperor's decisions. So, during the next court session, Prince Li read the prepared edict in front of everyone, officially appointing Prince Sing as the crown prince. This time, the emperor hadn't revealed anything to Prince Sing, so Prince Sing was shocked. What had seemed like a normal court session ended up with him becoming the crown prince. He froze up for a good while until, at Prince Li's repeated urging, he finally kneeled. In front of the entire court, he thanked the emperor. In that moment, many thoughts flashed through his mind. When he came back to reality, he'd only just finished thanking the emperor. In order to demonstrate how much he valued the crown prince, the emperor smiled and gave him an effusive round of encouragement. Then, he ordered the ministers to help the crown prince familiarize himself with the various responsibilities of the 6 ministries and help him take care of government matters. Once they'd received their orders, the Ministry of Rites immediately started preparing for the ceremony. After court, the emperor asked the crown prince to stay behind. Tianchi, how do you feel? The emperor asked. When Mu Tianchi came to court this morning, everyone was still calling him Prince Ting. After this edict, he'd become the crown prince. It was all so sudden, but he couldn't say that to the emperor, so he just nodded. Feeling complicated, the emperor chuckled as he patted his shoulder. Do well. Actually, the emperor had a whole lot to say about this crown prince position, not to mention their father-son relationship that was just starting to improve. He just didn't know where to start. The emperor heard that during the incident with Princess Langya, Dabao had tried to come save him with a tiny slingshot. The child's actions warmed his heart, but he was also fascinated that such a tiny child could be so brave. Did he also want a reward? When he asked Dabao, Dabao couldn't explain it clearly himself. You're his grandfather, Li Yu had said. It was the natural thing to do. The emperor had witnessed all kinds of plots in his lifetime, and he was used to everyone having an ulterior motive. He'd forgotten that one could still do things without looking for anything in return. It was just familial love. Dabao wanted to save him because he was his grandfather, because he was family. Dabao was like that, and so was Prince Ting. Even though Prince Ting never brought it up, the emperor was very aware that if Prince Ting hadn't come to save him that day and had let him be killed by Princess Langya, no one would have blamed him, and Prince Ting might even be on the throne already. But Prince Ting had stepped in. That was proof of the love he had for him. Choosing his words carefully, the emperor said something he never would have before. Tianchi, if you don't disappoint me, I won't disappoint you. The crown prince had never expected that the emperor would be so honest with him. He also nodded slowly, trying to accept it. Oh, right. There's something else I've been thinking about for a long time. The emperor looked at the crown prince amiably. He'd already become crown prince, so the emperor didn't think there was any point in beating around the bush any longer. He just said what he was thinking. When you got married on the western border, I wasn't able to attend, and that is still a regret of mine. After the crown prince ceremony, I want to hold another wedding for you and your consort. Tianchi, what do you think? Back in Prince Ting's manor, on a whim, Li Yu was teaching Dabao how to write. Although he was only 1 year old, Dabao could read many different words. The emperor had hired a teacher just for Dabao, and every day the teacher would assign Dabao writing homework. Despite his young age, Dabao was the most hardworking student in the imperial study. He always needed to complete whatever the teacher assigned him. When the other children came home from their lessons, they'd eat a snack and take a nap. But after taking a brief nap, Dabao would get up by himself and have Wangxi carry him to the study to write. Normally, he studied under his teacher, and the emperor often taught him here and there as well. Now he held the brush properly in his small, soft hands, but the writing really couldn't be considered pretty. But that didn't affect Dabao's desire to learn. Li Yu happened to pass by and see Dabao writing. He was bent over with his little butt sticking out, his expression serious and concentrated. For some reason, Li Yu was reminded of his husband, who often had the exact same expression. He struggled to hold in his laughter until his stomach hurt. When he took another look at Dabao's writing, Li Yu finally cracked. After being laughed at by his fish dad, Dabao pouted so hard that you could have hung a bottle from his lips. Dabao, let daddy teach you. Now that he'd laughed at his son, Li Yu immediately tried to remedy the situation. Thinking back to the way Prince Ting had taught him, Li Yu's heart felt like it was filled with honey. Imitating Prince Ting, he held Dabao's soft little hand with his own and started writing. Dabao, follow Dad, he said. Just write how I'm writing it. Now that Li Yu was no longer worried about the possibility of a side concubine, he was dealing well with his pregnancy and in great spirits. He wrote quickly. Once he finished a page, he stopped and let Dabao observe. Dabao was originally looking forward to Li Yu's writing. Even the grand secretaries couldn't stop praising Daddy Prince Ting's writing, so Fish Dad must be at a similar level. But once Fish Dad finished writing a page, Dabao's dreams were shattered. Fish Dad's writing was even worse than his. Dabao felt cheated. He was no longer willing to let Fish Dad teach him to write, but Fish Dad had no idea. He was itching to continue teaching, so Dabao turned around so that his little butt was facing Fish Dad, refusing. Liu suddenly realized he was being criticized by his son. The fish didn't have the word criticism in his vocabulary. Liu scoffed and threw down Dabao's brush, intending to teach this brat who dared judge his fish dad a lesson. Realizing something was wrong, Dabao hurriedly slid down from the table and started running. Liu rushed forward, flipping Dabao around. He blew on his hands to warm them up and started tickling Dabao. Dabao giggled loudly. The adult and child were both having a great time when Wang Xi suddenly ran in like his life depended on it. Wang Xi caught his breath with his hand resting on the door, crazy with joy. "Consort, there's huge news. His Highness has become the Crown Prince." "No way! Just like that?" He'd expected the Emperor to wait a bit, at least another year or two, or maybe even 4 or 5. After all, the Emperor really cared about his power. Perhaps he'd even test Prince Ting some more. Last time, he sent Prince Ting to the western border, so perhaps next it would be the southern border. He really didn't expect the Emperor to appoint him as Crown Prince so soon. Well, okay. When the Emperor asked Prince Ting to handle official matters, Liu had more or less had an idea. In the book, Prince Ting never became the Crown Prince, but his husband had done it. Though he wasn't officially on the throne, he was very close to it. Liu's eyes were a little wet, but he was genuinely happy for his husband. He was just thinking about how to celebrate after Prince Ting got home when Wang Xi said, "Now that His Highness is the Crown Prince, you're the Crown Prince Consort. The edict will arrive soon. The Emperor also said that after the ceremony, he wants to hold another wedding for you and His Highness." Liu's bliss immediately gave way to fear. No way. He'd already given birth to 4 fish, plus he had his daughter inside of him, and now he had to get married again? "What did His Highness say?" he asked. He hoped his husband would reject the Emperor. No. It was a little embarrassing to get married with a round stomach. Besides, they'd already consummated their marriage twice and held a ceremony once, so it felt weird to do it again. "His Highness..." Wang Xi was about to respond when he spotted his master walking in through the door out the corner of his eye. Wang Gongong smiled and shook his head. "You can ask him yourself." Recently, Wang Xi had gotten even better at reading his master's expressions. As soon as his master returned, Wang Gongong immediately retreated with the young master in tow. "Tianchi, you're the Crown Prince now?" Liu was delighted to see his husband. He walked over happily, supporting his stomach. He was already starting to show. Mu Tianchi worried every time he saw him walk, so he hurriedly told him to stop and walked up to Liu, and then reached over to support him, encouraging the fish to lean on him. "His Highness the Crown Prince!" Liu winked at him triumphantly. Mu Tianchi had been feeling a little cautious, but the way Xiao Yu was acting made him want to laugh. Having been given the title of Crown Prince, he was one huge step closer to his goal. He knew very well that without Xiao Yu, he might still be a mute prince to this day. Where would this Crown Prince position have been then? "Xiao Yu, everything is thanks to you," he said. "Thank you." That was what he wanted to say the most at morning court. Huh? Are you being polite with me? I already heard Wang Xi say it. Congratulations, Your Highness. I heard Royal Father wants to hold another wedding for us. Thinking of the scale of the wedding back on the western border, Liu's heart started pounding at the thought of all those people. Prince Ting thought he wasn't happy and held his hand nervously. "Because of your current state, I didn't say yes. Do you think I'm mistreating you?" "Really? How could I think that?" Liu burst into laughter. Prince Ting really said no? As expected of his man, they were on the same page even when it came to things like this. Liu was still praising his man in his mind when his man said, I told Royal Father we can wait until after you give birth and recover. You deserve to have everything in the world. A satisfied smile hung on Prince Sting's lips as he made this promise. But Li Yu, on the other hand, holding the wedding after birth? He might as well have not said no at all. The Princess of Jinjue said that after she gave birth, she'd felt like a cloth sack that had been emptied out. He was really afraid of getting married as a cloth sack. But looking at Prince Sting's expression, did Prince Sting really like it? Even though Li Yu found it embarrassing? After all, they'd be able to consummate their marriage once again. Never mind. Since his husband liked it, he'd deal with it when the time came. It was just drinking the marriage wine, red blankets, and wedding robes. He was experienced when it came to wedding play. He'd just lose some weight after giving birth. Li Yu felt his skinny waist and slowly started to look forward to the wedding. Li Yu's reaction to his husband becoming the crown prince seemed normal. The crown prince himself also thought his consort was very calm, as expected of a carp spirit. But somehow, in the middle of the night, things went awry. The fish woke up several times, shoving his husband awake and yelling urgently, "Tianchi, you're really the crown prince now?" Mu Tianchi nodded for what felt like the 1,000th time, patted Li Yu on the back, and held him. As it turned out, this fish wasn't truly calm. He was just slow to react. Li Pregnancy Brain Yu was so happy he could fly. My husband is the crown prince. Fishy dance GIF. Chapter 139, Original Fishy Form. Prince Sting became the crown prince, so Li Yu became the crown prince consort. In this era, Li Yu had no family or background. He'd thought this would cause him difficulty, and the crown prince had been prepared too. If anyone had something to say about the consort, he'd rebuke them right then and there. But not a single official said a word. It wasn't that nobody coveted the position of crown prince consort. After all, once the crown prince became the emperor, the crown prince consort would be the empress. Who wouldn't want to fight for that possibility? But despite the efforts of those people, Prince Sting and his consort's relationship held strong. Prince Sting never even ended up getting a side consort. Never mind getting a side consort, he didn't even have any concubines or servants. The emperor was clearly also letting Prince Sting do whatever he wanted. Now that Prince Sting was the crown prince, how could they possibly manage to steal the crown prince consort position? They might even anger the crown prince with their efforts, which wouldn't be worth it. There was no point in making an enemy of the person you were trying to marry. Though Li Yu's lack of background was a detriment, he already had 4 sons, and all 4 of them were loved by the emperor. As soon as they were born, the emperor had given them titles and often sat with them on his knee. His affection for them was obvious. If anyone else wanted to become the crown prince consort, they'd be offending these young royal grandsons. Nobody dared, so nobody said anything when Li Yu became the crown prince consort. And so that was that. The crown prince currently lived in his manor. The emperor wanted him to move into the palace, but the crown prince said his manor was fine and that there was no need to make such a huge fuss. Considering that the consort was in the midst of his pregnancy, the emperor decided moving was indeed too much work. Besides, the crown princes of this dynasty hadn't all lived in the palace, so the emperor acquiesced and instead renamed his manor the Crown Prince Manor. The couple still lived there and were simply assigned more guards to match the standards of a crown prince. The emperor gave out all the titles and honors he intended to and felt very satisfied. Afterward, however, he realized something. Da Bao was originally the Prince Sing heir. Now that Prince Sing was the crown prince, Da Bao could no longer hold that title. Although being the son of the crown prince was much better than being the son of an ordinary prince, the fact remained that the other children all had titles, but Da Bao didn't. The emperor firmly decided that this was a slight to Da Bao and could not let it slide. With a wave of his hand, he gave Da Bao the title of Commandment of Light Chariots, a standard class, rank 3 position. At first, the emperor had wanted to name him a prince and give him Prince Sting's original title. It would have made a lovely story. But when he told Luo Zhuisheng this idea, head eunuch Luo's knees nearly went soft from the fright. He rushed to convince the emperor to change his mind, so the emperor settled for the commandment of light chariots. But even so, the emperor still thought Dabao deserved more. When Li Yu received the official edict, his mouth kept twitching in disbelief. He'd been really worried the emperor would show too much favor to Dabao and give him the title of crown grandson. What would they do then? Good thing the emperor was still capable of seeing reason. Dabao was a very lucky fish. Everything had gone smoothly for him ever since his birth. He'd even helped his fathers win over his grandfather. How could a child less than 2 years old hold a rank 3 position? What kind of luck was that? The true koi of their family was clearly Dabao. Having been officially granted titles, they had to go to the palace to thank the emperor, so Li Yu got ready to leave. He'd never liked to go outside much to begin with, and since he became pregnant, he was even more careful. But he had no choice but to go to the palace. Earlier, Li Yu had sent a note to his husband, the crown prince, to let him know. He even brought the crystal bottle with the fish body double inside. The emperor had given him the #1 fish in the world title, so he had to thank the emperor for that too. Might as well get all of it done in one trip. Wang Xi accompanied Li Yu into the palace. As the consort was now with child, Wang Xi picked a round-faced servant girl who knew both martial arts and medicine to stay closely by Li Yu's side. They were just about to leave when the crown prince sent a message asking Li Yu to wait a little bit. The servant who came to pass along the message didn't know anything else. Li Yu thought it was weird, but he still listened to his husband and delayed his trip to the palace. After about half an hour, the crown prince rushed back into the manor. Li Yu was surprised at first, then smiled. "Why are you here?" The crown prince smiled back. "I'm taking you to the palace." "Ah, that's such a hassle." Li Yu kept on saying that, but he had a big smile on his face. Clearly, he was thinking something different on the inside. Who didn't like it when their other half was always thinking of them? Prince Sting always personally accompanied him everywhere. Even now that he was the crown prince, this habit remained unchanged. For the last few days, the crown prince had been busy at the Ministry of Rites, but because Li Yu had wanted to enter the palace, he rushed back home. Will this affect you negatively? Li Yu was not so secretly delighted, but knew his husband was always one step away from being criticized. The crown prince smiled easily. "No, I've already asked the minister to leave." Li Yu nodded, somewhat understanding. It was fine as long as he got permission. He felt like this minister was very sympathetic toward his subordinates. But he completely forgot about his husband's current status. Even if he hadn't asked for permission, nobody at the Ministry of Rites would dare stop the crown prince. Now that the crown prince had hurried back home just for this, the couple left for the palace together. The crown prince had rushed to the manor on horseback, but the consort couldn't ride a horse while he was pregnant. Both he and his consort rolled in a carriage to return to the palace comfortably. The carriage traveled slowly. By the time they arrived at the palace, the consort had already comfortably taken a nap in the crown prince's arms. We're here already?" Li Yu had always thought there was quite a bit of distance between home and the palace, but this time the time passed quickly. Wang Xi, who was following the carriage, tried his best not to laugh. The crown prince knew exactly how fast that wasn't. The crown prince helped Li Yu off the carriage, and one of head eunuch Luo's underlings was already waiting for them. As soon as he saw the crown prince, he bowed, then led everyone to Tianqing Palace. Because the consort was pregnant, the servant had prepared a soft palanquin for him. The crown prince glanced at it, then shook his head, ordering Wang Xi to bring out the small palanquin he'd brought with them from the manor. What? When had his husband prepared this? How come he didn't know? But it meant he didn't have to walk, so the lazy fish immediately sat down. He assumed the crown prince would come sit with him and patted the space next to him. but the Crown Prince remained unmoving. The palanquin wasn't as large as a carriage, and the Crown Prince was afraid of squishing Liu, so he didn't get on. Instead, he pulled open all the curtains. That way, Liu wouldn't feel cramped inside, and he could keep an eye on his fish. After the consort sat down, 8 servants from the manor lifted the palanquin up and started walking. The Crown Prince followed alongside. The palace servants had heard that the Crown Prince and his consort were very affectionate, but they never expected to be slapped in the face with such obvious PDA just from a palanquin. Since the Crown Prince didn't need him, the servant went back to Tianqing Palace first to inform the emperor. The palanquin traveled slowly. With nothing else to do, Liu observed the scenery around him. When they passed by the imperial garden, Liu suddenly spotted something white among the bushes. Liu's heart skipped a beat. "Hold on," he said hurriedly. The Crown Prince ordered the servants to stop, then turned to Liu. "That white thing," said Liu. Were his eyes playing tricks on him? It looked like Xue. Back when he was delivering the tiger talisman, Xue had helped him lure away the guards. Afterward, Liu had asked Wang Gongong if Xue had been caught by the guards. The guards had thought Xue was just a feral cat, so they never searched for it around the Cold Palace. Later on, during the battle at Tianqing Palace, the Cold Palace remained relatively untouched. Liu was very happy that Xue hadn't been injured on his account. But because of the bad blood between the Crown Prince and Lady Chu and the Marquis of An, Liu couldn't let it show too much. Liu asked Wang Gongong to pass Xue a bag of little dried fish as thanks. Though he hadn't ordered Wang Gongong to do anything else, after the servants at the Cold Palace found out Wang Gongong from the Crown Prince's manor cared for this cat, they no longer dared to bully Xue, and as a result, Lady Chu's conditions improved a bit as well. Liu didn't hide any of this from the Crown Prince. He told him directly. The Crown Prince was very familiar with his character. Xiaoyu was kind and always repaid a favor. Even if the other party was a cat, he would still do his best to thank them. The Crown Prince trusted him to handle the situation and fully believed in him. On this trip to the palace, Liu had asked Wang Xi to bring some little dried fish just in case they ran into Xue. Because of this, Xue had been at the back of his mind the whole time. Now that he saw a ball of white in the imperial garden, he automatically assumed it was the cat. Following Liu's gaze, the Crown Prince also saw it. The round-faced servant, Xiao Luo, went over to look. After a while, she came back holding a cat. Because this cat hadn't been checked over, Xiao Luo was afraid to approach. She only took a few steps forward so the consort could take a look. Liu immediately recognized Xue. What a coincidence! What's wrong with it? Why was it hiding in the bushes? Xiao Luo examined Xue carefully. It was very clean, but there was the smell of blood on it. After taking a sniff and examining Xue's body, she discovered that there was a thick layer of gauze on one of Xue's back legs. There was blood on the gauze. "It's injured," she said. Wang Xi moved forward, testing the cat's fur with a silver needle. The needle didn't change color. Wang Xi looked toward the Crown Prince for his decision. Normally, that was enough of a test. Hearing that Xue's leg was injured, though, Liu was a little worried, and he looked at the Crown Prince pleadingly. He couldn't resist Liu's large, round eyes. He turned and coughed lightly. "Take another look. Nothing's wrong with being careful." The Crown Prince ordered Xiao Luo to hold on to the cat and to not approach. He walked over himself to examine Xue. Seeing the prince, Xue suddenly started yowling pitifully. It bit the gauze on its leg, and the blood slowly started to spread. As a result, the Crown Prince noticed the injury on its leg. He thought about it for a moment, then said to Xiao Luo, "Unwrap it." Xiao Luo carried a medical kit with her, so if there was nothing wrong with the injury, she could rewrap it for Xue. Not daring to disregard the Crown Prince's orders, she immediately unwrapped the gauze. A ball of red cloth rolled out from underneath. Xiao Luo thought it was weird. Upon further inspection, although there was blood on Xue's leg, there was no injury. The blood had probably come from the fabric. It's my mistake. Xiaoluo immediately kneeled down to beg for forgiveness. What's wrong? Li Yu was still in the palanquin. He was surprised to see Xiaoluo suddenly kneel down. Nothing. We're rewrapping the cat's wound. Don't worry. The crown prince's expression grew dark. Piao Xue hadn't been injured, but had been wrapped in gauze to mislead someone into thinking it was injured. There was definitely something suspicious about the thing inside the gauze. Many explanations came to the crown prince's mind at once, but he was afraid of alarming the fish, so he kept his voice steady. With that explanation, Li Yu calmed down and continued to wait. The crown prince glanced at Wang Xi, who immediately pulled Xiaoluo up. The two of them walked a little further away with Piao Xue and removed the gauze and fabric from its leg. They confirmed that the blood had come from the fabric. Wang Xi had seen many things. He could tell there was something wrong with the fabric. If an unsuspecting person got too close to Piao Xue, they might have touched whatever was on the fabric. Xiaoluo covered her hand with a handkerchief and opened the fabric up, revealing more and more blood. The blood was incredibly pungent. Xiaoluo hurried to cover her nose. What is this? Wang Xi looked it over carefully. Your Highness, this isn't human blood. This old servant thinks it's dog blood or chicken blood. What is it for? I've heard that people would sometimes use dog blood or chicken blood to drive away evil, especially the blood of a black dog. Evil? The crown prince had never heard of such a thing. Hiding this so carefully within some gauze, it was all just to drive away evil? Yes, to drive away evil and spirits, said Wang Xi. Apparently, if y'all touch such blood, their original form will be revealed immediately. Spirits revealing their original form. The crown prince's expression immediately changed, and he looked at Xiao Yu, who was still waiting for him on the palanquin. There was a spirit right next to him. If they hadn't discovered it, Xiao Yu might have touched Piao Xue, then the fabric. Then what would have happened? A voice in his head told him Xiao Yu would have transformed in front of everyone. Xiao Yu's original form was a fish. He had thought it was strange that such a thing would appear on a cat from the Cold Palace, and that they would meet it on their way to Tianqing Palace at that. Perhaps someone had discovered Xiao Yu's true identity and wanted to harm him. Chapter 140. Crafty Fishy. Nobody is allowed to reveal to anyone else what happened here. The crown prince gave strict orders to everyone present. Wang Xi and everyone else immediately shut up. Li Yu sat for a while in the palanquin, but the crown prince never had Xiaoluo bring Piao Xue over. What is it? Li Yu felt a little uneasy. Throughout his entire pregnancy so far, he had really felt how much his husband cared for him, perhaps even a little too much. If he really wasn't allowed to touch the cat, he'd just ask Wang Gongong to feed the cat for him. He knew the constant checks were for his own good. Since he became pregnant, he often had a hard time controlling his emotions, so he tried to avoid getting angry. Mu Tianchi ordered Wang Xi to secretly dispose of the bloody fabric and kept Xiaoluo in charge of holding Piao Xue. He came back over to Li Yu and said gently, "We're pretty close to Jingtai Hall. Why don't we stop there first?" Li Yu didn't really care where they went, but the emperor was waiting for them. Was it all right to delay? The crown prince clearly had something he wanted to say. Did they have to change their plans because something had happened? But Li Yu believed in the crown prince, so he agreed easily. Then let's go. The crown prince drew the curtains and turned the palanquin in a different direction, toward Jingtai Hall. After they left, in the corner of the imperial garden, a person stepped out hurriedly from behind a Persian silk tree, looking toward the crown prince and his entourage, then turned to leave. Very quickly, a guard from the crown prince's manor followed quietly after. As the crown prince's former quarters, Jingtai Hall remained untouched for him. This was an interesting place, where unbelievable things kept happening. Li Yu and the crown prince had found their first clues leading to the Lowland assassin here. But the Lowland forces had been eradicated from the palace, so why had the crown prince brought him here this time? Definitely not for that. Li Yu had learned his lesson. He wasn't going to make an assumption like that again. The Crown Prince first helped Li Yu into a chair, putting a cushion woven from gold thread behind his back so that he could be comfortable. After Li Yu finally settled down, the Crown Prince called out to him solemnly, "Xiao Yu." "Husband, why are you being so serious?" "Someone did something to Piao Xue," the Crown Prince said. "We found something inside the gauze wrapped around its leg." The Crown Prince was afraid to tell Xiao Yu everything at once, in case he scared Xiao Yu, so he only explained a little at a time. There was something wrong with the gauze around Piao Xue's leg. Li Yu paused. Was that why the Crown Prince hadn't let Xiao Luo bring the cat over? Judging by how the Crown Prince was behaving, that was definitely it. "What was it?" Li Yu asked. "Dog's blood."
Huh?
The only kind of dog blood Li Yu knew anything about was gratuitous media tropes, but that clearly wasn't what the Crown Prince meant. "What is it for?" he asked curiously. The Crown Prince was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed. "You don't know." The fish with the system said defensively, "I've never even seen it, so of course not." Fine. Xiao Yu was just an innocent carp spirit. Perhaps he didn't have any experience with such things. The Crown Prince slowly explained the use of dog blood. The fish was completely shocked. Li Yu's mouth gaped especially wide when he heard that a Yao would be forced to transform back into their original form. So wide he could fit in half his fist. "Dog blood would make me... Oh God, it would make him reveal his true form? What kind of Deus Ex Machina was that?" Though fish with systems belonged to the fantasy genre, he wasn't superstitious. What original form? And besides, his actual original form was human. If this thing could make him human forever, that would be great. But if it was that easy, why did he have to do all those quests? This fish didn't fear such a thing. Hey, hang on. Wait. Li Yu suddenly remembered he'd told the Crown Prince he was a carp spirit. From that angle, he should be afraid of transforming, so he should fear the dog's blood. How did one display fear again? Xiao Yu's expression froze for a moment as he tried his best to make it show fear. When he saw how still he was, the Crown Prince thought he'd been frightened. It made him even angrier. He held Li Yu's hand tightly. "I won't let you face any danger." Li Yu felt like something had bumped into his heart, and he nodded lightly. He had always known that no matter the danger, this man would protect him no matter what. "Do you have any idea who it could be?" the Crown Prince asked. Li Yu was lost. He barely left the house these days, focusing all his energy on the child in his stomach. If he could offend someone by doing that, he would have offended everyone under the sun by now. Was it another hidden boss? Ugh, please no. Princess Langyao was enough. He didn't want any more surprises. The Crown Prince was also familiar with the way Li Yu spent his days, and he knew it couldn't have anything to do with Xiao Yu. Besides, whoever had tampered with Piao Xue on their way to Qianqing Palace had to be someone from the palace. He'd left behind some guards to keep an eye on the Imperial Garden. Piao Xue was just a cat, so whoever was behind this would definitely follow Piao Xue. All he had to do was follow the trail. He scoffed coldly. "We'll find out soon enough." The Crown Prince ordered Wang Xi to let the Emperor know that his consort was a little tired and that they would head over to meet him after a little break. Li Yu was bored, snacking on a plate of peach blossom pastries he'd brought from the manor. All he'd done today was eat and watch his belly grow, riding around in carriages and palanquins. How could he possibly be tired? Aha! The Crown Prince was probably trying to lure out the enemy. Li Yu immediately put down the pastries, pretending to be so tired he couldn't even lift his arm. "Tianshi, I'm so tired." He fluttered his eyelashes at his husband, fixing him with a charged gaze. The prince was now so familiar with the fish that he could tell what he wanted just from a flick of his tail. He held in his laughter as he fed the fish a piece of pastry. The fish might have suddenly seemed tired and weak, but as soon as the pastry reached his lips, he polished off the entire thing. Watching his lively fish, the crown prince was determined to protect him. After about 10 minutes, a guard came to report that the guard who'd stayed behind in the imperial garden did indeed spot a servant spying on them. When he followed the servant, the guard found that they entered Yongfu Palace and never came back out. Yongfu Palace? Li Yu was confused. Wasn't that where Consort Zhang, Princess Langya, had lived? But wasn't she dead? There's still someone living there? Mu Tianchi chuckled coldly. Of course there was. Princess Langya was dead, but there was a male consort still living in Yongfu Palace's side chambers. Right. A noble lady with the last name Chu. He'd only managed to get into the palace on Princess Langya's recommendation. It's Chu Yanyu? He wants to harm me? Li Yu couldn't believe it, but according to the guards, the person spying in the garden lived in the side halls of Yongfu Palace. There was no one else it could be but Chu Yanyu. He thought about it carefully, but he had practically never spoken to Chu Yanyu before. The only time they'd interacted was when he stopped Chu Yanyu from drugging his husband. After that, he'd barely even seen the man. Because noble Lady Chu didn't have a high status, it wasn't usually his place to speak up. Every time they saw each other, it was just a brief glance. Besides, he was the wife of the male lead, and Chu Yanyu was the male lead's father's concubine. There was no reason for them to fight. Why did Chu Yanyu want to pour dog's blood on him? Was there something wrong with his brain? The crown prince gave it more thought than Li Yu did. It's unclear where Chu Yanyu stands, he said. He might have connections to Princess Langya. After all, noble Lady Chu was brought into the palace on Princess Langya's recommendation, and had once been the lover of the sixth prince, whose name had been removed from the royal family records. This might just be a last-ditch attempt to lash out. Chu Yanyu had followed Princess Langya since the revolt started, but the emperor hadn't punished him. There was a reason for that. That day, when the emperor was detained within Qianqing Palace, Chu Yanyu stayed at Princess Langya's side, but kept secretly observing the emperor. Though he couldn't help the emperor escape, a cup of water, a bowl of tea, was enough for the man to leave a deep impression on the emperor. The emperor had given Puliu a lavish funeral, then come in person to ask after Chu Yanyu. Noble Lady Chu just claimed he had been forced by Princess Langya and had no choice. The emperor couldn't find any evidence of noble Lady Chu colluding with Princess Langya, and so, since he pitied him, he didn't investigate any further. After Princess Langya died, noble Lady Chu's life improved. When Yongfu Palace was sealed, noble Lady Chu kept living in the side halls. The emperor had picked out a palace, wanting noble Lady Chu to live there, but noble Lady Chu said that it would be better if he stayed in the side halls, as he could constantly be reminded of his own mistakes and pray for the emperor. And with that, noble Lady Chu started to climb up the ranks, using Langya as his stepping stone. But the emperor no longer cared about the harem. Though noble Lady Chu had left an impression on him, the emperor didn't show him much attention. Perhaps noble Lady Chu could ascend to the status of concubine in a few years, but that was probably it. The crown prince was very familiar with Chu Yanyu's past. He usually wouldn't spare any of the emperor's concubines an extra glance, and no matter what kind of existence Chu Yanyu led at his manor, now that he was a noble lady, the crown prince didn't intend to bring up anything unnecessary to the emperor. As long as he kept to himself, they could leave each other alone. The crown prince wouldn't do anything. But noble Lady Chu should not have touched his consort. If he knew Xiao Yu's identity, the crown prince would not allow him to spread the news any further. Tianchi! Tianchi! Seeing the crown prince deep in thought, Li Yu waved 2 fingers in front of his face. The crown prince grabbed the playful hand, smiling. Why did Chu Yanyu try to harm me with that? Li Yu asked. Does he know something? Although Li Yu wouldn't actually be harmed by the blood, if Chu Yanyu had discovered his identity somehow when he wasn't paying attention, It would be bad if the news got out. They had to get to the bottom of this. The crown prince immediately pulled Li Yu in close, kissing his palm. I'll find out. Chu Yanyu was just a noble lady, so he only had 2 female servants and 2 eunuchs. The guards quickly found out that one of Chu Yanyu's servants had gone to the hunting grounds during the hunt. When she returned, she seemed to be in a daze, saying she saw a monster. Everyone said she was hysterical, and nobody believed her. As of late, this servant often spoke to noble Lady Chu for long periods of time behind closed doors. Li Yu was confused. I didn't let anything slip at the hunting grounds. Even when I did transform, you were always there. Wait, there had been that one time. It was when the crown prince's emotions became too intense and he vomited up blood. The imperial physicians had examined the prince overnight, and he had stood guard over him. When he had to transform, he was in a rush and went to the neighboring tent to do it. Was it then? Although he had turned into a manmer and scared the passerby when he was delivering the tiger talisman, he had transformed from a fish to a manmer. Nobody could have known that monster was the crown prince consort. It was impossible for someone to find out that the consort could turn into a fish unless they witnessed the transformation from human to fish. That was the only way. Li Yu recounted the situation at the hunting ground, and the crown prince nodded. The servant might have witnessed Xiao Yu transforming, and though Chu Yanyu might not have known about the fish bringing the tiger talisman, he had seen Xiao Yu slap the sixth prince. Combined with the words of his servant, Chu Yanyu might have suspected something. But why did he plot to have Xiao Yu transform? Your Highness, I have an idea. Li Yu looked toward the prince, rubbing his hands together excitedly. This gaze that didn't fear chaos, coupled with this mischievous tone. The crown prince chuckled. And do as you like. I'll clean up after you. You're so good to me. Li Yu cheered and jumped. Last time at the hunting ground, he didn't get to have enough fun. He'd made up for it this time. He was a hard-working carp spirit. If Chu Yanyu wanted him to transform, he'd transform. Li Yu smiled. This time, he'd brought the crystal bottle and fish double with him. It was time for them to get to work again. An hour later, the small palanquin from the crown prince's manor rushed toward the gates. The servant who'd been spying in the imperial garden returned. When he got to Jingtai Hall, he saw there was a palanquin about to leave, so he followed. The wind rustled the curtains of the palanquin, and the servant clearly saw that there was no one inside. There was only a huge crystal bottle that held a fish carp speckled with gold, elegantly waving its tail. Chapter 141. Fishy Outfit Change. When Chu Yanyu found out from his trusted servant that there was nothing in the crown prince consort's palanquin but a fish in a crystal bottle, he bit his lip heavily. The crown prince's consort really was a fish yao. He had guessed correctly. At first, when one of his servants kept saying the consort was a fish, Chu Yanyu didn't believe her. After all, how could a live human be a fish? But during the Princess Langya incident, he saw for himself the way Prince Sing's fish jumped up and slapped the sixth prince. He'd seen the fish many times, but this was the first time he'd seen it slap anyone. So now he couldn't help but pay attention to it. Then he found out that this fish had helped the crown prince deliver the tiger talisman, apparently to the crown prince consort, which was how the consort was able to get in contact with the troops. Chu Yanyu thought the fish seemed a little too intelligent. Suddenly, a few memories stirred. Back when he was in the Sixth Prince's manor, he'd heard Mu Tianxiao mutter about Prince Sing's fish. The Sixth Prince thought there was something wrong with the fish, but despite all his suspicions, he never managed to discover anything. Then he heard the Marquis of An's mother, Lady Chu, mention that Prince Sing's fish was not normal. It could fly, and even slapped her. After the Marquis of An went crazy, he would also often mention the fish. If only one person thought there was something up with the fish, Chu Yanyu might just laugh it off. But when 2 or 3 people all said so, He had to conclude that something was off. When the servant brought up the crown prince consort turning into a fish, Chu Yenyu's heart skipped a beat. Was that the truth? Was the consort not human, but a fish? He immediately ordered the servant to recount everything that had happened in minute detail. Chu Yenyu had attended the hunting festival himself. He knew the crown prince had fallen ill there and required medical attention. The timing and locations of what the servant said matched up to what he knew, and the fish which the servant said the crown prince consort had turned into was the same one that Chu Yenyu already thought was suspicious. If the consort could really transform into a fish, then he was a Yao. That would explain the fish's intelligence. Besides, the crown prince consort was the Li Gongzi who used to be in Prince Xing's manor. Other people might not be aware, but Chu Yenyu knew all about it. But Li Gongzi had also appeared suddenly in Prince Xing's manor. That was weird too. The crown prince consort's name was Li Yu. His name literally meant carp. Was that it? Was he really a carp? Chu Yenyu wanted to confirm his guess. He knew from the books he'd read that there was a folk method, using the blood of a black dog to revert a Yao to its original form. Chu Yenyu decided to try it out. With great difficulty, he managed to procure some blood, but he couldn't figure out how to get the crown prince consort to touch it. He'd been in the palace for a while now, but he was still just a lowly noble lady. He could only acquire a little bit of news through bribery in the first place, and information about the crown prince's manor was very hard to come by in the palace. However, there was one thing that seemed unrelated, but gave him an idea. Apparently, Wang Gongong from the crown prince's manor often went to the cold palace and fed little dried fish to Lady Chu's cat, Piao Xue. Once, when Wang Xi came to feed Piao Xue, Chu Yenyu came to secretly watch from afar. As Wang Xi fed the cat, he told the cat that this was from the crown prince consort, and so Chu Yenyu was able to craft a plan. While Piao Xue was looking for food, he caught it and kept it inside Yongfu Palace for a few days. Once he caught wind that the crown prince and his wife were entering the palace, he wrapped gauze around Piao Xue's leg himself. Beneath the gauze was a ball of fabric soaked in dog's blood. It would be hard to notice just from the outside. He heard the consort was very kind and kept ducks and rabbits at the manor. So how would he react to an injured Piao Xue? The answer was clear. With that, Chu Yenyu ordered his trusted servant to put Piao Xue somewhere in the imperial garden and to keep an eye on it from afar. The crown prince and his entourage really did take Piao Xue away, but they didn't go to Qianqing Palace. Instead, they returned to Jingtai Hall. When Chu Yenyu asked his servant to go look again, he discovered the crown prince consort's palanquin contained only a fish. Chu Yenyu smiled. Just as he suspected, the crown prince consort was a fish Yao. Originally, he'd hoped to one day become the emperor's favorite concubine. If things were going well, he'd use him. If not, he'd step on the sixth prince to get what he wanted. But unfortunately, life was unpredictable. The sixth prince had tried to plot against Prince Jing, but was unsuccessful and put in prison. Then he found out the sixth prince's mother, Consort Zhang, was actually Princess Langya from Lolan. Chu Yenyu's plans were completely ruined. And, disregarding all that, he only found out how difficult a concubine's life was after he already got to the palace. Consort Zhang, Princess Langya, had tempered with the emperor's wine, making him very drunk. That was how Chu Yenyu had climbed into his bed. In actuality, the drunk emperor hadn't done anything to him. Chu Yenyu knew this, but he would never clarify that. After becoming a noble lady, he realized the emperor didn't have much interest in male consorts. He'd had another male consort once, when he was young, but in recent years, this was the only one he'd had. At the time, Chu Yenyu was in a rush to get to the palace, so he didn't know what any of that meant. After he became a noble lady, he was left alone every day. That was when he realized that not every concubine was the same. The lower-ranking concubines, no matter if they were male or female, had to be carried into the emperor's chambers to be bedded. At first, he thought it was embarrassing, but since becoming a noble lady, he'd never once been carried. Even his servants started to look at him differently. At each banquet, he would always have a seat next to the emperor. To those who weren't aware, he seemed highly favored by the emperor. But he knew this was just an act the emperor put on to make the harem seem at peace. He probably didn't even remember his name. There was the saying, if the wine is fragrant, it doesn't matter how far down the alley it is. But the emperor's attention didn't work like that. The emperor had seen too many beautiful people. Chu Yanyu's looks didn't stand out. He was well versed in poetry and songs, but the emperor would never ask him to come show off his talents. The worst part was not that he wasn't better than everyone else. It was that he was never even given a chance to prove himself. Chu Yanyu realized that before he could exact revenge on the sixth prince, he had to have the emperor's affections, so he started to fight for him. But it was even harder than getting Prince Sting's attention. Every method he could think of, everyone else had already used it thousands of times. He was stuck in an awkward situation. He couldn't advance, nor was there a possibility to retreat. When the sixth prince fell, he lost his target for revenge, but also his support. Later, Consort Zhang turned into Princess Langya from Lolan. Chu Yanyu couldn't have been more shocked. Princess Langya told him a secret, that he also had Lolan blood in him. Yeah, I figured that. That was why she had originally chosen him to be by the sixth prince's side. Chu Yanyu was afraid of his identity being exposed, so he had no choice but to listen to Princess Langya. From his days in the palace, he knew one had to have a backup plan. He also knew that adding icing to a cake could never compare to helping someone in their time of need, so he purposefully took care of the emperor behind Princess Langya's back. This kindness was the reason his life was spared. Princess Langya was dead, so he was now the only remaining who knew that he was of Lolan descent. The threat was gone. The emperor treated him better than before, too, but Chu Yanyu still felt like it wasn't enough. The goals that kept him going before had all disappeared. He could only do his best to become a favored concubine and worked hard to climb up. That was when the emperor picked his heir. Chu Yanyu suddenly realized that the emperor was old. Whether or not he was a favorite concubine was no longer important. Even if he was, in the end, he might have to become a monk or be buried with the emperor as a sacrifice. Knowing he was trapped, what was the point of fighting for more? He was still young. How could he bear wasting his youth on the emperor? He was unsatisfied. So he set his sights on the crown prince instead. This again. Compared to the emperor, the crown prince was the rising sun. Everyone in the palace knew the crown prince and his consort were in love. Chu Yanyu had seen it too. Once, they were listening to the opera in the palace when the pregnant crown prince consort fell asleep halfway through. The crown prince asked for the emperor's forgiveness and carried his consort home. This was such a small thing, but Chu Yanyu cared. This was the kind of affection he had once dreamed of. Why was it that in the end, after all he had suffered, he was still just a noble lady with no one to care for him? On the other hand, the crown prince consort's life was smooth sailing. He had everything without even trying. In fact, the crown prince's consort's status was much higher than his. Chu Yanyu had to bow to him. Chu Yanyu felt unsatisfied with this until he found out the consort's secret. He knew this was his chance. Go send a message to the crown prince. Chu Yanyu ordered his servant. He was in a good mood. He fixed his clothing in the bronze mirror, then, on a whim, put on a bit of lipstick at his dressing table. He was only satisfied once his lips were plump and alluring. Chu Yanyu, he wants to see you? Li Yu held the secret report the guards had brought over, fidgeting. What the hell? He thought that after he tricked Chu Yanyu would go expose him to the emperor. Wasn't that usually how it went? But Chu Yanyu chose not to do that. Instead, he secretly sent a note to the crown prince. He was treating him, the crown prince consort, like he was just heir. Fuck! He'd been wondering what exactly Chu Yanyu was after. Turned out it was his husband. Li Yu turned into a jealous fish on the spot. Are you going to go? Are you going to go? Li Yu asked unhappily, not noticing he sounded like a parrot. He held the crown prince's arm, opening his mouth to gently bite down, his pointy teeth pressing into his husband's flesh. If he gave the wrong answer, he'd take a chunk out of him. Mu Tianchu burst out laughing, secretly enjoying the fish's jealousy, but he was afraid that Li Yu would hurt himself. He rubbed his head to comfort him. I'm not going, he said resolutely.
That's more like it.
Oh, said Li Yu smugly, then went from biting the other man to giving him a kiss. This kiss was very loud, making the crown prince's ears turn red. The crown prince said he wouldn't go, and that was that. The person Chu Yanyu had sent over with the note didn't even get to see the prince. When Wang Xi came out to relay the crown prince's message, he didn't even deign to look at the messenger. With the crown prince's status, how could a lowly noble lady summon him whenever he wanted? Wang Xi could guess what noble Lady Chu's intentions were with just his toes. He was one step away from calling noble Lady Chu shameless right to his face. The messenger left, dejected. Chu Yanyu waited for him hopefully, but all he got was the crown prince's rejection. He didn't believe it at first. How was that possible? Didn't you tell him I had important information regarding his consort? I did, many times, his servant said helplessly. But Wang Gongong just said the crown prince didn't want to come see you. The crown prince really didn't want to come see him. Chu Yanyu was infuriated. When the crown prince was Prince Jing, he'd never really looked at him. And now, when he might have something against the prince, he still wouldn't take him seriously. How could he treat him so coldly? He just wanted to save him from a fish yao, and in exchange, he wanted a place at his side. Although his current status was a little iffy, as long as the crown prince became the emperor, nothing was impossible. When he saw how loving the crown prince and his consort were with each other, he didn't just feel admiration. He was insanely jealous. He also wanted someone to treat him like that. At one point, he had been very close in proximity to the crown prince too, but the prince never gave him a chance. Since he couldn't have it, he'd destroy it. You did this to yourself! Chu Yanyu's eyes were red as he swept the bronze mirror before him to the ground. He sat for a long time at the table before getting up. He fixed his hair, then, leading his servant, he walked to Qianqing Palace, limping. Chu Yanyu had finally made his move. Li Yu was excited. What were they going to do if the antagonist wasn't following the script? The crown prince's answer, we'll just have to force him to follow the script. Now that Chu Yanyu was going to see the emperor, Li Yu had to get moving too. Who should I pretend to be? Li Yu looked at his husband excitedly. At the hunting ground, Mu Tianchu had pretended to be a guard to protect him. Now it was his turn to pretend. To be honest, it would have been enough for him to just sit in the palanquin. He didn't need to get dressed up. But the consort clearly wanted to have some fun. The crown prince thought about it. Then a smile made its way to his eyes. There was no way he could pretend to be a guard, as there were no pregnant guards. There was, however, a wet nurse who rode the palanquin to Qianqing Palace with the crown prince. Although this newly minted wet nurse was a little on the bigger side, with her stomach a bit large, she was still young, beautiful, and charming. Even His Highness the Crown Prince, who loved his consort deeply, couldn't help but take a few extra looks. Don't let Li Yu find out. Chapter 142. Fishy Yao Catcher. Chu Yanyu was waiting outside Qianqing Palace to see the emperor. The emperor had a good impression of him, so he allowed him to enter. When he entered the palace, he realized that the crown prince's children were there as well. The children of a Yao must also be Yao, so it was no wonder they were able to capture the emperor's heart. Chu Yanyu felt disdain toward these Yao. Dabao and the others were studying in the imperial study room when the emperor heard that the crown prince and his consort were coming, so he ordered Luo Zheisheng to go get them so that the family could be together. The children spent a lot of time around the emperor, so they'd seen the emperor's concubines frequently too. In order to gain the favor of the emperor, noble Lady Chu had also tried to be good to the children, and he often brought them little jade figures or toys. But the babies had been warned by their fish dad to not get too close to strangers or accept their gifts. Noble Lady Chu never managed to build a relationship with them. When he saw the kids this time, Chu Yanyu's attitude was visibly a lot colder and not as enthusiastic as usual. Though the children were young, they were still able to tell. Very quickly, they noticed the noble Lady Chu, who always smiled at them, wasn't smiling anymore. "He's so fickle," the children whispered among themselves. Fickle was a new word they'd learned recently, and they used it a lot. When the emperor heard their childish words, he burst into laughter. Meanwhile, Chu Yanyu couldn't be more embarrassed. He had to just pretend he hadn't heard. "Your Majesty, I have something important to report." Chu Yanyu took a step forward and knelt down. Because this had to do with the fish yao, the children would be in the way. Chu Yanyu hoped the emperor would have them taken away. "Just say what you need to." Even though Chu Yanyu was trying to make precautions, the emperor didn't care. To him, Da Bao and the others were his grandchildren, not outsiders. There was no need for them to leave. Chu Yanyu gritted his teeth. It seemed like he would have to say it in front of these Yao. He'd already gone over what he'd say on the way to Tianqing Palace. He relayed what the servant had seen at the hunting grounds and the fact that there was nothing but a fish inside the Crown Prince Consort's palanquin. He didn't outright say that the consort was a fish Yao, but the implication was obvious. The emperor's first reaction was disbelief. It would be too preposterous if he believed a real living human was a Yao just from one person's word alone. "What do you mean?" he scolded Chu Yanyu in a stern voice. "Are you accusing the Crown Prince Consort?" Though the emperor had a good impression of noble Lady Chu, he considered the Crown Prince Consort part of his family. His impression of noble Lady Chu was not enough for him to suspect the Crown Prince Consort. Instead, his displeasure fell on noble Lady Chu. Da Bao was right by the emperor's side, listening. Had Fish Dad been discovered? Da Bao hurried to pull on the sleeves of the dragon robe. Seeing this, the emperor picked Da Bao up to sit him on his knees in case noble Lady Chu said anything else and scared the boy. Chu Yanyu had helped the emperor before, but the emperor would not allow a concubine to slander the Crown Prince Consort. "Noble Lady Chu is speaking nonsense," he said. "Take him to the Office of Punishment." At the emperor's orders, head eunuch Luo immediately came up to grab Chu Yanyu, looking at him like he was already dead. The emperor had a very good impression of the Crown Prince Consort. Was noble Lady Chu tired of living, accusing him of something like that? If it got around to the consort's husband, he would have offended both the emperor and the Crown Prince. But Chu Yanyu continued to struggle. "Your Majesty, please, listen to me. You've seen that fish," he protested. "Don't you think it's a little too intelligent? Besides, have you seen the Crown Prince Consort and the fish appear at the same time? It's simple. The Crown Prince Consort is that fish. They cannot possibly appear at the same time. I can promise everything I've said is true. If I'm lying, may I be struck down by lightning." Eventually, he was screaming at the emperor at the top of his lungs, even going so far as to swear an oath. "Your Majesty, please think about it. The Crown Prince Consort's name is Li Yu. He's clearly a fish Yao." Chu Yanyu's screams roused the emperor's fury. Hearing all this, Da Bao hung his head and trembled a little. The emperor was enraged and worried. "Silence! I don't believe it. He has to be a fish Yao just because his name is Li Yu." There was a decorated general in this dynasty whose name included the character for rabbit. There was a talented musician whose name had the character turtle. Were they rabbit Yao? Turtle Yao? Did Chu Yanyu have a brain or not? Sure, the emperor had never seen the Crown Prince Consort appear at the same time as the fish, but there were plenty of people who hadn't. Were they all also involved? How ridiculous! Chu Yanyu was all but pushed out by head eunuch Luo, yet he still persisted. "Your Majesty, what I'm saying is true. The Crown Prince Consort has reverted back to his original form now and is hiding at the palanquin leaving the palace. If you send someone, you'll see." The emperor didn't want to bother with him, but at that moment, a servant came to report that the crown prince had arrived. Right on time, the emperor immediately summoned the crown prince. Tianchi, noble lady Chu tried to slander your consort. How should we deal with it? The emperor's had hurt from all the yelling, and he wanted to comfort Dabao, so he threw all the responsibility to the crown prince. Royal father, my fish are indeed very intelligent. The crown prince said, everyone knows that, but I didn't expect anyone would fail to hold their tongue and slander my consort like this. I want to hear exactly what his accusations are. The emperor glanced at the crown prince, confused. He wanted Chu Yanyu to continue? Chu Yanyu was the only person claiming the crown prince consort could turn into a fish. The emperor was well aware of how loving the couple was. There was no way the crown prince would usually allow Chu Yanyu to continue to spout his nonsense, but he didn't seem worried. Never mind. Since the emperor had already passed the responsibility on to the crown prince, he could deal with it however he saw fit. Chu Yanyu was shocked. He didn't know why the crown prince had suddenly changed his mind and decided to see him. No matter, he was finally willing to listen to him. Chu Yanyu rushed to speak. Your Highness, I'm doing this for your sake. Please send someone to investigate the consort's palanquin. Mu Tianchi raised a brow. What's wrong with the palanquin? Unexpectedly, the crown prince cooperated with Chu Yanyu and ordered someone to redirect the palanquin to the palace. Soon after, the guards returned with a crystal bottle in hand. Your Highness, there's no one in the palanquin but this crystal bottle containing a fish. Got you! Chu Yanyu was secretly delighted. The guard entered, holding the crystal bottle. A silver koi flecked with gold appeared before the emperor and crown prince. Mu Tianchi scoffed. So what if this fish was in the palanquin? This fish is a fish, y'all, said Chu Yanyu. It can turn into the crown prince consort. That's why it's in the consort's palanquin. Your Highness, if you don't believe me, you can summon the consort. Chu Yanyu was sure the crown prince consort would not appear. But before he finished speaking, a young woman with a round belly wearing a light yellow pleated skirt and her hair wrapped atop her head walked in from the outside. There was a thin veil over the woman's face, covering everything below the nose. All that peeked out was a pair of bright, clear eyes. Seeing the emperor, she bowed to him clumsily. The small woman had to bow when faced with the crown prince. Mu Tianchi clenched his teeth. Before she could do anything, he pulled over a chair and stuffed the woman into it. Because the servants hadn't announced her, the emperor and head eunuch Luo didn't know who she was. They all looked toward the woman. Once she sat down, she noticed the emperor and head eunuch Luo were both looking at her, and she smiled at the both of them, a little embarrassed. When she smiled, her eyes curved like crescent moons. The emperor thought it looked familiar, but he couldn't quite work out why. Head eunuch Luo was more observant. He had noticed the woman's stomach. It seemed larger than that of someone who was simply chubby, but her waist was not thick. Was this? Head eunuch Luo had already worked it out, but when he looked at the crown prince and the woman, he could tell they clearly wanted to keep up their act. He had to just pretend he was blind and hadn't noticed anything. Tianchi, who's this? The emperor asked, confused. This is Dabao and the other's new wet nurse, the crown prince said. The emperor was bewildered. It was just the wet nurse, but such a big deal was being made over her? Perhaps that's what the crown prince wanted. The emperor wasn't sure. Dabao scratched his head, curious. Crown Prince Daddy said this was his wet nurse, but he'd never seen her before. Dabao slid down from the emperor's knees and ran to the wet nurse to see, only for the wet nurse to scoop him up. The new wet nurse blew into her hands and tickled Dabao right under the armpits a few times. Wasn't this how his dad tickled him? This was his fish dad! Dabao threw himself at him, unwilling to let go of the wet nurse's leg. Just now, when noble Lady Chu kept saying Fish Dad was a fish, Dabao had been really scared. Fish Dad said their identities had to remain a secret. If they were found out, they'd be locked up, so Fish Dad's identity could not be revealed. When the crystal bottle was brought in, the fish all looked at the fish inside, unable to help themselves. But after they took a look, they were reassured. That fish was just an old friend. Fish Dad was fine. Arbao, Sanbao, and Subao all ran over to the wet nurse as well. When they realized it was their fish dad, Arbao was just about to call out when the veiled woman gave him a fierce glare, then shushed him lightly. Arbao was so scared he didn't dare make a noise, but he still wanted a hug.
I guess that really is their wet nurse,
the emperor thought. Chu Yanyu hadn't seen the crown prince consort much, so of course he wasn't able to recognize him, and after the appearance of this woman, no one was paying attention to him anymore. He had to remind the emperor and the crown prince about the crown prince consort being a fish yao. Your Highness, he said clearly, this fish is your consort. Mu Tianchu retracted his gaze from the new arrival. Chu Yanyu thought it seemed a little weird. The crown prince gazed at the wet nurse passionately, but when he looked at him or the fish, he didn't seem to care. But Chu Yanyu didn't have time to think it through carefully. The crown prince glanced at the fish in the bottle. You say that's my consort. If you call out to it, will it answer? The veiled woman couldn't help but snort in laughter, but after a glare from the crown prince, she immediately went back to holding the children properly. Chu Yanyu had expected the crown prince to ask him that and had already thought of an answer to expose the fish yao in front of the emperor and crown prince. He stepped forward. There is a Taoist priest waiting just outside. He's experienced in capturing yao. Please allow him to get rid of this yao. Mu Tianchu nodded, expressionless. Xiao Yu had told him he wasn't a normal carp spirit, and that it didn't matter if it was a Taoist priest or monk, black dog's blood, or anything else. They were all useless against him. Besides, they weren't being used on him anyway. So, Mu Tianchu allowed Xiao Yu to watch in disguise. Very quickly, a Taoist priest around 30 years old with a yellowing beard walked in. Chu Yanyu had prepared this Taoist priest a long time ago. He was the same one who'd provided Chu Yanyu with the black dog's blood. Immediately, he started performing a ritual on the fish. He shook a golden bell relentlessly, chanting something, and dipped a peach wood sword and talisman into the water in the crystal bottle. After he was done, the fish kept swimming slowly. So he did it again. The fish still kept swimming. The Taoist priest and Chu Yanyu were both stunned. The Taoist priest had run out of ideas. Fish yao are afraid of black dog's blood, he suggested. To be honest, Emperor, Crown Prince, it has turned back into a fish because it came into contact with the black dog's blood. If we use the blood again, it will definitely reveal itself. Chu Yanyu agreed and even boldly looked at the Crown Prince's 4 sons. What he didn't say was that these 4 might also fear dog's blood. Mu Tianchu smiled. How would we get it to reveal itself? Chu Yanyu pulled out a porcelain bottle from within his sleeve. When he opened it, a pungent smell floated out. He handed the bottle over to the priest, and, with a brief apology, he placed the bottle before the fish. He thought the fish would definitely show fear, but it remained unmoved, shaking its tail hauntingly. The wet nurse held the children, and they also observed the situation. Smelling the pungent scent, the wet nurse covered her nose. Ugh, stinky, the children complained. The emperor also thought it stank. Head eunuch Luo brought over a handkerchief to cover his mouth and nose. This is the reveal you spoke of? The crown prince scoffed. Cold sweat beaded on the priest's forehead. The emperor had seen enough too. Seeing that the fish remained unchanged even after all their attempts, Chu Yanyu was starting to get flustered. He wanted to pour the dog's blood into the crystal bottle. He refused to believe that the fish yao would still withstand that. Chu Yanyu grabbed the bottle from the priest and was about to dump the blood in when the wet nurse, who had been silent this whole time, suddenly spoke up. If you do that, not even a regular fish would be able to take it. What do you know? Chu Yanyu said rudely. Fish yao are yao. They're different from regular fish. Yao can't be killed easily. As long as it uses any yao magic at all, it'll prove me right. I see, said the wet nurse. But what if that's just a regular fish? Then I'll beg the crown prince consort for forgiveness and let the crown prince do as he sees fit, Chu Yanyu said forcefully. The wet nurse took a deep breath. All right. There were no yao in this ancient era, only a fish with a system. He wanted to watch Chu Yanyu flounder a little more, but if he didn't put an end to this now, the fish stunt double might suffer a bottle full of dog's blood and become unbearably stinky. Noble Lady Chu, before you pour the blood, you should take a look at who I am. In the next moment, the wet nurse took off her veil. Chapter 143. Fishy Teasing Husband. The sight of that unexpected face truly came as a harsh blow to Chu Yanyu. Once she removed her veil, this woman that he found so puzzling turned out to be the Crown Prince Consort himself. Aren't you... He backed up in a panic, looking at the fish in the crystal bottle. The fish swam around carelessly and blew a bubble toward Chu Yanyu. How could the Crown Prince Consort appear in the same place as the fish? Wasn't the fish the consort? Chu Yanyu felt like his brain had completely glitched out. Noble Lady Chu, Li Yu said seriously, since you're so sure I'm a fish Yao, come try and force me back into my original form. This is impossible. This is impossible, Your Highness. Chu Yanyu's expression was ugly as he turned to the Crown Prince. Mu Tianchu's expression remained calm, not at all shocked. Seeing this, Chu Yanyu realized the Crown Prince must have known the wet nurse was his consort all along. This was all a plot to trick him. He was the only one who didn't know, and they let him leap about like a clown. Throughout such a grand performance, the Emperor noticed the Crown Prince remained calm and collected throughout. It wasn't until the Crown Prince Consort showed his face that he realized why the wet nurse seemed so familiar, as well as why the Crown Prince was allowing Chu Yanyu to do as he pleased. Before, the Emperor had put on a show for the Sixth Prince. Now it was the Crown Prince and his consort putting on a show together for Noble Lady Chu. If he didn't have ulterior motives, how could he have become the main character of the show? The Emperor looked at Noble Lady Chu with utter contempt. The Crown Prince's pet fish was a koi. It had been confirmed by Master Liao Kong, and the consort was a real, live human. With just a few words from any random person, he had been made out to be a fish Yao? If Noble Lady Chu could think up such rumors, the Emperor thought, then all the good things he'd done before could also be fake. Kindness and tenderness were ways for this person to gain his favor. He was actually the same as the Sixth Prince. All he knew was tricking people, as expected from someone who'd come from the Sixth Prince. But Chu Yanyu was just a lowly noble lady. What good would it do him to harm the prince's consort? After puzzling over it for a bit, the Emperor finally figured it out. He trusted the Crown Prince and wouldn't distance him over something like this. He was, however, disgusted with Chu Yanyu. This male concubine thought too highly of himself. Facing the Crown Prince's consort, Chu Yanyu had all sorts of guesses, but was too afraid to say anything. But the Taoist priest that he'd found had no situational awareness. When the Crown Prince consort said, "Come try and force me back to my original form," Noble Lady Chu didn't move. But the Taoist was sure this was a fish Yao, and he waved his golden bell. The bell rang. The Crown Prince consort remained calm. There was absolutely no effect. How dare you? The Crown Prince was furious. How dare the priest insult his consort right in front of him? The prince immediately shielded his consort behind his back. The priest was still wildly ringing his bell. Annoyed, the Crown Prince sent the priest flying with a single kick. The kick was so strong that the priest hit a pillar head first and passed out, bleeding. "Take him away," said the Crown Prince. Guards immediately appeared on either side of him and dragged away the unconscious priest. Chu Yanyu covered his mouth tightly. The Crown Prince's ruthlessness had really frightened him, but he couldn't even make a sound. Wang Xi walked over, and the Crown Prince glanced at him. Wang Xi walked outside, then brought in a female servant. Chu Yanyu immediately recognized the servant. It was the servant of his who claimed she had witnessed the Crown Prince consort transform. "I heard there's a servant in Yongfu Palace who keeps speaking nonsense," the Crown Prince said coldly. "Noble Lady Chu, I think you should get to the bottom of this first." The Crown Prince waved his hand, and Wang Xi brought Chu Yanyu before her. Chu Yanyu's last hope burned in his heart. He gritted his teeth. "Hongar, didn't you say you saw the Crown Prince consort turn into a fish?" "Yes," the servant called Hongar said, smiling. "I saw it with my own eyes." Chu Yanyu hadn't had the chance to take a breath yet before Hongar tilted her head and continued. I've also seen the Emperor and Noble Lady Chu turn into a fish. We're all fish. Chu Yanyu saw that her gaze was unfocused, and the way she spoke was all over the place. His heart went cold. Hongar had fully lost her mind. But before, people said Hongar was crazy because they didn't believe her. She wasn't actually crazy. Chu Yanyu knew from actually interacting with her. It must have been the Crown Prince. He'd offended the Crown Prince, and the Crown Prince was too ruthless. With his final blow, all of this had been reduced to Chu Yanyu's plot. He didn't have a single witness left to defend him. Noble Lady Chu, what do you think? Mu Tianchi asked him directly. The Crown Prince was going to stop all the harmful rumors about Xiaoyu right here in front of the Emperor. This whole situation with Chu Yanyu wasn't entirely without benefit. Now, if anyone claimed the Crown Prince consort was a fish Yao in the future, he'd be able to deal with them immediately. Your Highness, Chu Yanyu got on his knees. The situation was far more serious than he could handle. Currently, he had nothing going for him at all. He couldn't continue to fight against the Emperor and the Crown Prince. Noble Lady Chu, the Crown Prince laughed. Do you remember how you said if the consort was not a fish Yao, I could deal with you how I saw fit? Your Highness, I was misled by Hongar. That's why I said those things. Please have mercy. Panicking in the face of his own assertions, Chu Yanyu tried to explain, stumbling over his own words. What was he going to do? Was the Crown Prince going to put him in the Cold Palace? The Cold Palace wasn't fit for living. He didn't want to go there. Chu Yanyu truly started to panic. The Crown Prince stared down at him and said clearly but coldly, 200 strokes of the board, stripped of all status, then send him to the Cold Palace. Chu Yanyu collapsed to the floor. In his daze, he remembered he was the Emperor's concubine. How could the Crown Prince send him to the Cold Palace without asking the Emperor first? Your Majesty, please, on account of the fact that I've helped you before, please save me, Chu Yanyu begged pitifully. He'd suffered a beating before. He knew that if he really had to go through with the 200 strokes, he very well might end up dead. The Crown Prince definitely wouldn't let him go, so he could only beg the Emperor. When the Emperor heard him mention what he'd done for him, the corners of his lips slowly drooped down. Noble Lady Chu really did have his own agenda. The Emperor felt he'd been tricked and didn't want to acknowledge Chu Yanyu anymore. Instead, he ordered the guards to drag him a little farther away. Chu Yanyu pleaded the whole way there. Li Yu turned away, not wanting to feel any sympathy toward Chu Yanyu. If Chu Yanyu had only offended him, perhaps he would have asked the Crown Prince to give him a lighter punishment. But Chu Yanyu hadn't only offended him. He'd also offended the Emperor, the Crown Prince, and worst of all, he'd set his sights on the kids. When he witnessed the whole thing as a bystander, he could clearly see that Noble Lady Chu looked at his children with malicious intent. Li Yu was often soft-hearted, but that didn't mean he didn't have a limit. His children were his boundary. No matter if Chu Yanyu was the original love interest in the book or not, there was no way he'd let him harm his kids. Following his husband's lead, Li Yu's expression also grew cold. Regardless of what happened to Chu Yanyu, he never wanted to hear about him again. After Noble Lady Chu was taken away, the Crown Prince asked the Emperor for forgiveness. After all, he'd punished one of the Emperor's concubines without asking and had even tricked the Emperor at the start. But the Emperor wasn't about to blame him. He was delighted that there was one less cunning concubine by his side. Oh, right, Tianchi, your fish. The Emperor paused. Mu Tianchi looked like he was listening respectfully, but his heart flew into his throat. The fish-body double and Xiaoyu were still subtly different. Had the Emperor noticed something? Never mind, it's nothing, said the Emperor. When the fish in the crystal bottle was brought into Tianjing Palace, the Emperor thought the fish seemed a lot quieter than before. But it wasn't like the Crown Prince's fish didn't have its quiet moments. Besides, Noble Lady Chu had brought a priest to challenge it. Was the fish supposed to jump for joy? The Emperor hadn't spotted any differences in the fish. Besides, compared to Noble Lady Chu's fake concern, this fish had truly helped him get through some tough times. The emperor himself had given the fish the title of #1 fish in the world. Even he thought it would be absurd to suspect it. "Take care of this fish. Bring it into the palace more often. I want to see what new tricks it has." The emperor was looking forward to it. He remembered how this fish had brought him a flower during his birthday celebration. The crown prince and Li Yu both knew this fish had plenty of tricks up its sleeve. That was one thing the emperor could count on. The emperor never suspected a thing, and the crown prince finally relaxed. He suddenly noticed that the crown prince consort, who was wearing a skirt, was winking at him mischievously. He thought the consort was kind of cute like this. After everything was over and done with, everyone returned to the crown prince's manor. Li Yu kept delaying, finding excuse after excuse to keep the skirt on. He'd never worn woman's clothing before. It was a fun new experience. Besides, he'd managed to fool the emperor, so Li Yu figured his wet nurse disguise was very successful. Even with his belly, no one suspected a thing. They all just thought he was a little on the chubby side. His high spirits remained until they returned to their bedroom. Under his husband's playful gaze, Li Yu was also in a playful mood, but he wasn't in a rush to get changed. Keeping the skirt on, he went to tease the crown prince. "Your Highness, do I look good like this?" Li Yu hugged the crown prince's arm, smirking. In order to look more like a wet nurse, Li Yu had stuffed a lot of padding inside his clothes, trying to make himself look charming. This was a rare opportunity for the crown prince to witness his extraordinary acting skills. The crown prince, who could only feel a bunch of padding, slowly retracted his arm, not saying anything. The consort thought his plan had backfired. The crown prince was gay, so he probably didn't like this kind of thing, right? Sob. He'd gone overboard. What if this left a lasting negative impression on his husband? Li Yu hurriedly took out all the padding, threw it on the floor, then went behind the silk screen to take the shirt off. But the outfit was a little hard to remove. Li Yu had barely undone the pearl buttons on his collar when the crown prince suddenly came around and kabedoned him against the screen. "Wet nurse?" The crown prince called out to him with a quiet laugh. Li Yu was confused, but answered anyway. The crown prince scooped up the fish, walked out from behind the silk screen, and threw him down on the bed, carefully avoiding Li Yu's stomach. When he kissed him, Li Yu closed his eyes, satisfied. "Are you really a wet nurse?" The crown prince asked with a chuckle. Li Yu's head was starting to fill with more and more filth as he randomly nodded. He'd given birth to the children, and he'd fed them. Of course he was a wet nurse. And then there was nothing after that. Wet nurse Li Yu was sucked dry by the father of his children. In the first half of the night, they were fighting and pounding. In the latter half, all that was left was sweet noises. The couple were still in the middle of a private, passionate exchange when someone knocked desperately on the door. Usually, whenever they did such deeds, they would lock the door. Li Yu hurriedly wrapped the blanket around himself and glared at the crown prince. But his messy hair, teary eyes, and swollen lips didn't hold much threat. The crown prince's mood soared. He smiled at him indulgently, then went to open the door. A fish baby stood outside, holding a small pillow. "Dad," Dabao said timidly, "I want to sleep with the wet nurse." The children slept on their own now, so that they wouldn't bother their fish dad, but Dabao still wanted to sleep with his fish dad. He'd finally found an excuse. Mutianchu stared down at Dabao. How could Li Yu say no to his son? He immediately had his husband bring his son in. Dabao was very happy to be next to his fish dad. Hugging his little pillow, he willingly went to sleep between his two dads. "Be good, Dabao. Be quiet." Dabao closed his eyes blissfully. Li Yu threw a comforting glance at his husband. The couple lay down around their son. Soon after, there was another knock on the door. In that fashion, the door was knocked on 4 separate times. In total, there were 3 fish babies who wanted to sleep with the wet nurse and 1 who wanted to sleep with Crown Prince Daddy. Probably Sobal. What were they going to do? The wet nurse was dumbfounded. "Only this once." The crown prince swiped at Li Yu's nose affectionately and laid down with him, holding their babies. Everyone was finally satisfied.
I'm safe from any further essence absorbing, right?
Li Yu thought carefully. After a night of peace, the children left for the imperial study the next morning. The crown prince went to the Ministry of Rites. When he returned, he smiled at Li Yu. Wet nurse? Wet nurse Li Yu's face went bright red, his eyebrows ascending into his hair.
Asshole! Is there any end to this?
Okay, everyone. Wow, these were some very interesting chapters. I really, really liked them. So let's just go ahead and get into my notes yes. The first thing I wanted to say is, this is actually addressing a note I mentioned in the last video about the number one fish in the world and euphemisms and stuff like that. So I had actually watched an interview, I think Kictor was the one that did it, of several of the Seven Seas Danmei translators and learned something. So in a lot of times when they're doing translations, of course, I know this aspect of things in general, they can't always directly translate something from Chinese to English because there is no way of directly translating it. And so what I learned is what they'll do is if there's something in Mandarin that just wouldn't make sense if they translated it in English, they'll try to find some kind of saying or expression, idiom, whatever, that is the equivalent of what it means in Mandarin. So with that being said, number one fish in the world, well, we know that you may not know, but when it comes to the word fish in America, it's also a euphemism for female genitalia. So if someone is saying that, she has, number one fish in the world, and when Li Yu was like, when have you eaten fish and stuff like that, when you think of it from that perspective, does it make more sense now? So anyway, I just thought I'd share that tidbit with you. It was actually a very good interview. If you guys want to watch it, I'll make sure it's the credit that is attached to this video. Anyway, the next thing I wanted to say is, actually, no. I wanted to tell you guys how to say emperor and crown prince in Chinese. Why? I don't know, but I'm going to. So the way that you say emperor is Huangdi. 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 Okay. And then the way you can say His Highness the Crown Prince, which if many of you have watched Heaven's Official Blessing, Heaven Official's Blessing, whatever, wherever the S goes in Mandarin, then you guys already know. 太子殿下. 太子殿下. So that's Emperor Huang Di and His Highness the Crown Prince, 太子殿下. Okay, that's enough of the Mandarin lesson. Let's go on to my next note. Oh, no, that's not all of the Mandarin lesson. My next note is actually still another Mandarin lesson, and that is about the word criticize. So it was saying when Li Yu was trying to teach Daba how to write, he was like, oh my gosh, am I being criticized by my son? And it said the fish didn't have the word criticism in his vocabulary. So I'm not going to teach you the word criticism. I'm going to teach you the word criticize. And that is pi ping, which every time I hear it, I'm like, pee-peeing. But not pee-peeing. So P-I, and then P-I-N-G, ping. Now you can technically just say ping, or a lot of times when they have ing, they kind of young, like pi-pyung. So putting more emphasis on the in there, I guess. Pi-pyung. Anyway, that's how you say criticize. So of course, if you want to say like, don't criticize me, then you could say 别批评我, 别批评我. Okay, now that's officially all of the Mandarin lessons. So let's go ahead and move to the next note, which is actually about Li Yu and Piao Xue. I wanted to say, which we've already learned throughout this entire series thus far, is that Li Yu is very compassionate, right? And I love that about him because from his very first experiences coming into this world, he was met with Piao Xue trying to tear him apart, essentially. But he didn't allow that to like make him hold a grudge, because he definitely could have. And I know some people might look at it like, oh, that's not a big deal or whatever. But considering he was in a fish body and he was already disoriented coming into a new world and everything, about to be cooked and then about to be, torn apart by a cat, it's a very traumatizing experience that he could have held on to. But instead, he has shown kindness after kindness to Piao Xue instead of holding a grudge on a cat for doing cat things. I really appreciate that so much because, like we live in a world where sometimes I feel like people get mad at people or animals for doing those things that they naturally do, like kids. Adults, parents will get mad at their children for doing what kids do. And don't get me wrong, when kids do certain things wrong, you need to discipline them, teach them better. But they will literally get upset with kids for doing this is natural. What are you doing? So I appreciate that about Li Yu, and I can definitely see that that is probably something that's going to go into how he raises his children as well. So he has my vote of confidence. Next, I want to go back to page 263. For those of you who don't have the book, that is when it was talking about dog blood. And it said, Li Yu was confused about the dog blood. And he was like, the only kind of dog blood Li Yu knew anything about was gratuitous media tropes. So I wanted to let you know that Gou Xue, dog blood, is a slang term for fiction with a lot of cliched over-the-top elements like amnesia, long-lost family members, fake deaths, stuff like that. That is the little footnote that's in there for those of you who did not know what Gou Xue was or dog blood was in tropes. And then next, Chu Yanyu. You are such an NPC. And the fact that you just kept trying to make yourself relevant when you were not was probably the most annoying thing in the world. I don't think it hurt the plot or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm annoyed by Chu Yanyu. You had yourself set up in a good position, but because you were seeking things that were not yours, things that you could not obtain, you messed it all up for yourself. You couldn't be satisfied. And don't get me wrong, I understand whose tutelage you came under, essentially. So I understand why you are the way that you are, but at some point, as an adult, you have to take responsibility for yourself. You have to hold yourself accountable and be a better person and be grateful for what you have and want things that are actually attainable by honest means, not malicious means and manipulative means. So it's just kind of it's interesting to see a character completely ruin things for himself. And I think there was one point where I had maybe a sliver of empathy for him, but still not a lot. But yeah, after all of this, I have absolutely none. Just none. Because at the end of the day, if Li Yu was a Yao, what benefit, what would come out of that? What do you think would actually happen? Because if I'm being honest, I get what they think about Yao in this era or whatever, supposedly. But if Li Yu really turned out to be a Yao, I'm not so sure it would be a problem. And the reason I say that is, number one, Li Yu has already shown himself to be such a kind person, and he has helped people without wanting something in return, and that includes the emperor. So he's already made an impression. Compared to Chu Yanyu, who he sees, has done things not out of the kindness of his heart, but so that he could bring it back up later, or to advance his own motives. But Li Yu has really proven himself to truly care about the crown prince, the emperor, his children, and just people in general. Not only that, but the emperor has already spoken with Liao Kong, and Liao Kong knows that he's a Yao. So it's very easy and very simple to bypass that. Even if it was maybe an initial shock, I feel like the emperor wouldn't even care. He'd be like, oh, that's crazy. Well, guess there's a Yao in the family now. I'm honestly feeling like that's probably what would happen, because I've learned that this emperor is a lot different from other emperors from other novels and just sea dramas in general. He seems like a true family man, and that's what he really, really, truly wants. You can just see that. And you were even able to tell that, he just wants to live a good life, which is why he's like, okay, it's time for me to like step down. Because after everything that happened with Princess Longya, I'm ready to call it quits. I just want to spend time with my grandkids. With my grandkids. So anyway, yeah, that was funny. These chapters were great. I'm so glad, you guys. We are almost done. I'm excited. So please just let me know your thoughts on these chapters. Anything you found laughable, anything that maybe annoyed the hell out of you. What's your favorite part? Whatever. Put those in the comments and I'll engage with you later. Well, einnehmen.